Welcome to Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws, the podcast that cuts through the rubbish to explore the world of neurodiversity. I'm your host, Nick King.
And I'm your host, Kate Fox. And together we're here to explore, understand, and celebrate being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. From ADHD and autism to dyslexia and other quirky brains, we talk about it all.
And go off on tangents. So, whether you're neurodivergent, love someone who is, or you're just curious about neurodivergent minds, you are in the right place.
Let's get ready to juggle some words and maybe even a few chainsaws, metaphorically, of course.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws with myself, Nick King, and our lovely co-host, Kate Fox. And today we're going to talk about large crowds. How are we defining large crowds, Kate? How large is large?
Oh, that's a good point. I suppose it depends on the context, doesn't it? Because you could have a large crowd in a small room, and it feels like a large crowd. I'm thinking of the little local cafe, 35 people in that suddenly feels like a large crowd. But if 35 people were in St James's Park, that is not a large crowd. The Newcastle United Stadium, for those of you who are not familiar. So it is a little bit contextual, actually. Although I think the thing that has precipitated this thought is the possibility of a large crowd of demonstrators. We are talking at a time when there are demonstrations, protests and riots, and there are counter-protests, counter-demonstrations and counter displays of peace, love and joy, but nonetheless they contain large crowds. And actually, in that setting, sorry, you've asked an autistic person to define a large crowd. I feel this could go on for some time, but sorry. But, at that point, I'm thinking thousands. And that's a lot of people in a,
And it is partly about the setting, isn't it? That a large crowd in a large space isn't necessarily as large as a perceived to be large crowd in a small space. And I think as well, it depends on the organization of the crowd as well. So that, I don't know, even if you go into like a large stadium for an organized event, there's a level where that crowd is going to be organized into like spaces and lines and I don't know, bag searches, or even if like I think about how much I go at the theatre, and one of our local theatres is I think 2,000 seats. And the other one's not much smaller. But that never feels particularly large crowdy because people are filtered into different spaces and then mainly sitting down. Maybe it's something in unpredictability. Not that I really want to get into like the line of autistic people like can't deal with unpredictability, but I think there is possibly something in an unpredictability to a large crowd in potentially like an open space.
Yes. Again, I think this comes down to context. Okay, well, yes, unpredictability maybe is one factor, and it's also what are they doing? So for me, as an example, last year I went to the Buddhist festival, and there was a situation basically, or what would often happen at the end of a particular event. The crowd would filter out, but actually the crowd were not supposed to cross the path of whoever had, led the event. And so you would actually be cordoned off in a canvas area or in the temple for maybe 10-15 minutes. And what that crowd would do would get up from their chairs where they had been sat in a Buddhist, compassionate, peaceful manner and just sort of mill and stand. And I, to my own surprise, found that absolutely unbearable in one particular instance, to such a degree that I had, I suppose, pretty much a panic attack. But I took myself off to the corner of the a tented off area, and then basically made a break for it when I saw someone from my own Buddhist centre and asked her essentially to rescue me from the scary, scary, compassionate crowd. Like that crowd was whoa. Few weeks later, and with my friend who had also been at that Buddhist festival, we're outside in Durham. It's the Lumiere Festival. It's night time. We're on a cobbled street. Suddenly, we are in a crowd. And she was concerned and she said, "Are you all right?" And I was completely all right. It had not even occurred to me. There was an issue because we were moving. It was quiet. I wasn't hemmed in. I wasn't trapped. There was just a general, somehow there was a calmer air because people were in Durham looking at lovely lights. So it was an utterly different situation there. I suppose in one I was trapped as well. In the other I wasn't. And in one it was noisy. In the other it was a gentle hush. Those were two of the factors that impacted.
So, and I think we've said for a long time that we need to do a podcast about like where's the emergency exit, which I think's in there as well. So we'll have to do that soon. But I am with you. So if I'm in like a venue that has a lot of numbers in, I'm a runner. Like I am happy to like stay until that sort of final moment of clapping or final moment of whatever, but then I am out of there like a rat out of an aqueduct. I don't know. I am at pace leaving. And obviously I have a plan for exactly where I'm going. And normally that will definitely be like not public transport. Do you know what I mean? Like that would be either a car or I would have booked a hotel close enough that it's within like walking distance. Um, and I know sometimes we go places with friends who are like they have different like access needs, they have different mobility issues, and they are not runners and they need to like stay and let venues empty. And no, like I I would have there because I think if you can get like ahead of the crowd, because then you end up in situations where there's people who are milling and there are people who are trying to do moving. And as soon as you're out of the immediate venue, there's not rules to coordinate movement and stuff like that. And sometimes you can hit a wall of people, can't you? And a wall of noise. Um, or sometimes just a wall, I don't know. But like I'm happy to stay to the like the end of a gig or like anything. But after that I'm quite keen to like do one.
See, so it does sound like unpredictability is a big element here, but also
Say.
overwhelm. How likely is there to be sensory overwhelm in the situation that you find yourself in with the crowd? And I have to say, none of this was an issue of any awareness for me. I don't think until, I mean, not even when I was diagnosed in 2017, it was not an evident issue to me. In fact, I don't know that I would have been able to talk about it as a particular issue that I was aware of my own reaction to um, until the last 3 or 4 years, really. Um, Partly because, and I'm sure I will have said this in various ways, in various situations in our podcast, I was not aware for a very long time that my nervous system was becoming overloaded or overwhelmed. I was just used to feeling quite overwhelmed. And now I have a much better baseline. And I know that often being in a milling or unpredictable or noisy crowd takes me out of that baseline. I had a lovely experience actually when I was in an airport recently. I've
Mm-hmm.
probably talked about airport experiences before. This one is very recent. Um, I was sat in the departure area, and that I would say that's large crowds. They're not all together, are they? But there's some in the duty-free shops, there's some in the cafe, there's some on the way to the gate. It's a lot of people in a big space. And I just sat at my table and I put my noise cancelling headphones on, which are becoming more and more important, and I read. And therefore, I was insulated from the crowd. But if when I took my headphones off, when I looked up, oh, I'm in a crowd. And you wouldn't, it wasn't like a football crowd, was it? I mean, it was only maybe like a shopping mall crowd. Ah, here's another factor. Sorry, a shopping mall crowd.
Uh-huh.
They are they've got this certain energy, and quite often it's just, "Well, we're browsing, we're looking for some cheap jeans. Oh, here is a nice cookie with Smarties on. Here is a thing." That's a particular energy, isn't it? Airport crowd energy is, "Oh my God, I might miss my flight. Oh, this is stressful. I'm in an airport. Oh, I'm excited. I'm going on holiday." It is a more hyped up crowd. It is like the crowd at the Glastonbury Festival that I was caught up in last year, which was another bad crowd experience, where we were all kettled into a narrow area, and a lot of that crowd were, I mean, I don't, this could not stand up in court. I felt like they may have had some artificial help with their mood. And
I was just about to say that, like, the comparison there is, like, it's apparently fine to start drinking at 10 a.m. in an airport and also Glastonbury. Like, it's a
yeah,
thing though, isn't it?
that is also a thing. I'd sort of forgotten that. And why now? Here is a thing. A crowd in an airport that's drinking, a lot of those, "I'm drinking at 10 o'clock." Okay, a lot of them are, "Well, hey, it's holiday time. I'm going to demonstrate that by going outside my usual rules." A lot of that crowd are, "I am actually terrified that I am about to be in a metal thing in the air and I'm going to self-medicate." Perhaps even a lot of them are, "I don't really like being in a crowd of random people in a inside building where I've just had to go through security and it was all a bit weird. I will have some gin," I would suggest.
Yeah.
Mm.
And possibly there is something around that. So we were talking about sort of like the recent protests and things, but that's potentially a different thing again because I was planning to go into town that day and I have unplanned to go into town that day because it seems like a really bad idea. Um and no, it's not even just about potential crowds and potential I suppose I am actually back into unpredictable behavior. But if I was taking my children in, what they might hear, what they might see, it's got a very, very different vibe to the people who are sitting on a motorway, which I'm not condoning either. But like it's a different sort of crowd and vibe, isn't it? And maybe a lot of it's around our trauma around being sensory overloaded, our trauma around shouting, our trauma around being visually overstimulated. You know, you're talking about that movement of people and how you went down and focused on your book. Because crowds are also they're visually like overstimulating. Because it's a lot of movement that is not necessarily following a pattern.
Mm.
And then yeah, I it's difficult. I do deliberately go out of my way to avoid crowds as much as possible, and it's probably something that I would plan around the most. And I'm a bit funny about sort of busy areas, like we're going to London, but I do generally avoid London most of the time because it's a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the tube. Oof, to
Oh no,
be.
we're not planning on going. No, that's my line.
Yeah, no, well,
No.
like, that thing of where, I mean, I won't get on a, I mean, as little as possible actually will I travel on the tube anyway nowadays. Now I'm more aware, but the thing where everyone squishes in all to a carriage all together. Oh, and then that, oh, for me, oh, it turns out that just evoked a smell for me.
Yep.
So many smells, all
No.
in you.
But yes, but also that.
But
No, we will be using our privilege and getting a taxi. Um,
right,
that
yeah.
that is where I no, like, it's a line that I just no, we would just run out of spoons immediately.
Some people, it has to be said, um, well, is it even most people? Is it most people? A lot of people are drawn towards crowds. They like being in crowds. They're like, yay, people, because I am a human and I like social interaction and oh, but it's a crowd. I know there is a lot of variations of this. I think one is, um, people who are just not that bothered by it. You know,
Mm.
it's genuinely not overstimulating, it's not overwhelming, it's not triggering trauma, they're just okay. And so they're down with whatever the crowd is for. Some presumably are driven there because it's a dopamine hit and a dopamine high, and it's exciting to have that overwhelm. It's like, yay, I am about, you know, it's like a rave has that.
Rave. I went to mosh pits, but like rave, I'll take rave.
Yeah, and you can get into a different state of consciousness, not just because of the ease in a rave, but there is something about the communal, "Oh, I'm no longer just me, my boundaries have melted, you know, I am one," which actually, as a state of being, I'm quite down for that state of being, but I am put off that state of being if it's too physical and if it's in a crowd, you know, as in, I'll do it in a gentle room with 15 Buddhists. You can have that. There's just a little bit less Fatboy Slim playing in the background. Sorry, he's literally the only DJ I could think of in that moment. Um, so yeah, so people are drawn. You know, a lot of people are talking about wanting to counter protest.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not, I'm not hearing from them any sense of, oh, but this might be a bit of a sensory issue for me. Although I have to say also, not a slight hint of this might be a sensory issue for other people.
Definitely not.
I'm
Um,
not finding, yeah, great social awareness around this, I have to say.
I mean, yeah, I don't think I think there is a lot of things and people who are not on the list of consideration around protests. And we've definitely probably fall into that with many others. Um, Definitely in terms of minorities and intersectionalities. But I suppose that's not I don't know what's signing a petition. That's the indoor version of protesting, isn't it?
Well, like, literally, I've shared a link. I have signed a petition, and I'm gonna, that's, see, I was, you forget, it's just us chatting, also it's our podcast. I kind interesting. So I've cancelled a performance because I did not want to cause other people, particularly people of colour and particularly neurodivergent people, possible intersection across the two things too, to have to pass through uh, what I perceive as a massive scary crowd. Um I think I do feel a little bit of guilt around that. That's interesting because I have resolved I'm going to donate. I'm still being paid, which is good. But I'm going to donate the fee to Hope Not Hate. And it's interesting. I mean, clearly it's because I'm a lovely, nice person with a great social conscience. I mean, it is partly, but also I think it's the guilt of, oh yeah, well, because everyone else, like, they're showing how they are out there and they're doing it and they're standing up. And I'm mainly thinking, oof, imagine being among some people who smell and are shouting. Of course, I'm not going to do that. Um,
But we
uh,
all don't have to try and change the world in the same way, do we? Because there are other options. There are petitions, there are donations to charity, there is giving your time to charity, there are organisations, well, for anything and everyone these days. And you can do things in different ways, can't you? And I mean, I know we've had conversations outside of here about duty of care, but you have to have a duty of care if you're thinking to yourself. I know you don't necessarily have a direct duty of care to your audience within that context of duty of care, but you are a nice person and you are considerate. And, you know,
and I,
there is a level of duty of care there. You need to think that your audience has a different intersectionality to many of the people who would be attending that day. And it might be more triggering and less appropriate for them to be in that room. And then if you're facilitating that space, does it then become a bit problematic? And then even
yes,
within that, I don't think, because the other element of a crowd that we both do is that we stand in front of one and we talk. And it's weird because I quite often get how many people are you willing to train? Like when I go train people, it's like how many are you willing to do? And if it's a turn of like literally training them rather than like a workshoppy type situation, I'm just like, I don't care, pack them in. And it genuinely doesn't matter to me whether it's 20 or 300. And that is again, it's a crowd, isn't it? But it's
and
a
it
very different situation when you're standing in the position of control.
exactly, and that
It
you're
links
not
back to the word control, but, like
it is, and I suppose I did a gig for the, games makers. What games would that have been? Or maybe it was the Tour de France, Tour de Yorkshire thing where there was many volunteers. Anyway, it was for about 4,000 people in an arena. But that felt, although I was aware that was a lot of people to perform in front of, I was over there on a stage. They were over there, and it was very far away. And at the end, I would get taken off into a quiet room. Ooh, but again, this is an issue that has certainly it's massively increased for me, in the last 2 or 3 years, and perhaps in terms of that whole getting older, possible menopause symptoms, all those things that might increase sensory, overload. I'm just thinking of another gig I did more recently, and somebody, without thinking at all, shepherded me through a communal area where there were only about 20 people, but they were round a buffet. Oh, they were round a buffet like flies on a bun, and I had to really I was like, "I don't want to walk through these people. I really don't want to. I feel everything." But so many people are not aware of this even about themselves, so that partly coming back to the audience and the duty of care, is it I don't know. It may just not have occurred to some of them as a problem. So I'm kind of stepping in a bit of a nanny role, maybe. I don't like that idea, but at the same time, I just didn't like it. I couldn't look at my audience while I'm doing poems about a post-trauma world, having sent them through basically, as far as I can tell, guaranteed increased trauma, a traumagenic environment. Someone contacted me who runs a group for young autistic men and said that they had rearranged their event because it would take place nearby, and they're just really hoping that none of the lads decide to go into town. So I think she's got a feeling of a duty of care, a fear around that, a fear. To be honest, and I'll link this to me. Oh, this is a genuine thought. If I saw someone, so I've done a lot of Buddhism and a lot of meditation now, but I can still occasionally get into a situation where I'm just in fight or flight and could choose fight. And if I've just seen a horrible person throw a brick at someone they shouldn't have, I'd love to absolutely guarantee that I'm not going to, I don't know, pick up a brick back and throw it at that person. I actually can't.
it's gonna be really difficult to continue this podcast if you are in jail.
Exactly, exactly.
It really, really difficult.
It would, and even if I felt like I was on the side of the righteous, oh dear, I would have broken Buddhist vows. I would feel bad eventually. Um,
And there is part of that, and it's part of the autistic experience, is it? That you like to think you'll know how you'll behave when you are overwhelmed or you are in fight or flight or when your cortisol is running high. But realistically, sometimes it can catch even the most Buddhist, meditative, self-aware of us out. And I have to say, it's something that I didn't say to you, but my concern about going into town that day, because I'd planned to take my young humans in, is that I would like to think, and previously have, if I'd seen something that I thought was wrong, that I would somehow model how I would want my children to behave. So, like, if I'd heard something racist, I would model what I thought would be appropriate. But bear in mind we are recording this before the 10th of August. So for context for our viewers, we do record in advance. And it hasn't happened yet. But I would have wanted to model something, but in that situation, that modeling wouldn't have been safe. At which point I'm questioning, like, if that's not something I'm going to do in front of my children, and I'm just going to sort of like ignore a behavior that I don't think's appropriate, then it's not the space I want to be in. Do you know what I
mm,
mean? That's not what I want to show them. What I
mm,
have done is I've decided to book Come From Away for my youngest, because that's set in the immediate 72 hours after 9/11. And it covers lots of themes of like being suspicious about, brown people and like the people from I think it's Africa and Asia that were on the planes, like being judged for praying or being second guessed and second looked at. Because in that immediate moment, that's what happened. And I was like, out of all the things that I can try and explain to and my youngest is a very sort of young person. Not that they've seen, the riots, not that, they've really watched the news, but I think it's so interesting that that's currently the show on at Newcastle Theatre Royal,
Yeah,
because I think if I think about it, did that narrative really start that day? And are we 23 years later and not doing a lot better?
I would reckon. Although actually, yes, and I'm glad you're going to get to see it, and it's poignant that some performances of it were postponed, but they will be rescheduled.
Yeah.
Actually, well, I kind of want to take us back to 1989, the Salman Rushdie affair in Bradford.
Mm.
And I was there, and I was a 14-year-old living in Bradford, and I at some point have a memory of being in the Arndale Mall and it being locked down because there were some sort of protesters outside. At that time, as an
Diagnosed
undiagnosed
teenage kid.
thing, yeah, to
Yes.
me, I just remember that as exciting. It was just exciting. It wasn't scary that I remember, but I may have been completely unconscious of any fear, given that I was very alexithymic at the time. Um, just exciting to be near the Woolworths with the pick and mix sweets. I don't remember. I probably came away with some, not stolen, probably paid for them. Near Woolworths, and something's going on outside, and it's not quite real. Um, I do think that was a key moment in the narrative of our globalization, our bipolarization, all the things that happen. And then in a personal sense for me, it was also, could have been a moment where I realized the fear of crowds, it very much wasn't. So there's a developmental contextual element to what we're talking about here. Um, and that will always apply, won't it? That's the thing. It's not like you can say autistic and ADHD people, we're never going to like crowds. I suppose that's not, this is not where we are at all. But what we are saying is for neurodivergent people, their place in a crowd, physically, metaphorically, emotionally, culturally, is often a slightly different place and space than for people who are of the predominant neurotype. And it would be really good to think that just as hopefully we're beginning to consider that for some people of a different ethnicity or skin colour in a crowd, they are more at risk, and we should, as a society, as a nation, look out for them more. Same also for
Us. More safe spaces
more safe spaces. Here's
for
to that.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws. We're so glad you joined us today to explore the fascinating world of neurodivergence with your hosts, me, Nick King.
And me, Kate Fox. If our conversation sparked a thought, a question, or even a smile, don't keep it to yourself. Drop us a line at hello@neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk or visit our website neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk to write in. We'd love to hear from you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, consider leaving us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform.
Until next time, keep embracing the unique ways you juggle the chainsaws of life.